Hello. So last month, after the poisoning of a former Russian spy and his daughter in the United Kingdom, a story which we've been talking about today, one of my colleagues stopped me in the hallway and said, "Did you know that the CIA poisoned the Russian spy and his daughter in order to interfere in the Russian elections?" And I paused for a moment and I thought, that doesn't really fit with my worldview. And then she said with outrage, "This news is being shared all over my Romanian Facebook right now." So I'm here to talk today about Russian state-sponsored disinformation. It's real, and it's a subject that's been receiving growing attention in the United States. We've talked a lot about it today. The Center for European Policy Analysis, where I work, I'm the Chief Financial Officer and Chief Operating Officer. We are a think tank in Washington, D.C. that studies Central and East European U.S. relations. We've been conducting, or our analysts, I should say, have been conducting research on Russian disinformation taking place in the Baltic states, Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania, as well as in Poland and in Romania for the past 3 years. And these countries, they are our NATO allies, and we can learn from them their experiences. So first, what is disinformation? Who cares about it? Why does it matter? I think everyone here cares about it. Disinformation, as we've talked about it today, it's defined as false information deliberately and often covertly spread in order to influence public opinion or obscure the truth. It's the promotion of conspiratorial discourse that pollutes the information space, and it's used to increase polarization and undermine the democratic debate. SIPA is a nonprofit public policy research institute. We have our headquarters are based in Washington, D.C., and we actually have offices in Warsaw, Poland. We care about the impact of Russian disinformation on our allies in Europe. And our mission is to promote an economically vibrant, strategically secure, and politically free Europe with close and enduring ties to the United States, that's our very stated mission, which is also to ensure that America remains a permanent geopolitical actor in Europe and that Washington's policies keep European countries moored to a US-led international order. In a nutshell, our mission is to protect and strengthen Atlanticism. So I provide a few definitions about Atlanticism, but essentially, what I stated before is that we want to ensure that America stays engaged with these countries. We see the Central and East European countries really as the transatlantic link that keeps the transatlantic relationship strong and together. How do we execute our mission? Through cutting-edge research, analysis, programs, public events. SIPA provides insights on energy, security, defense. We work with governments and agencies through grants. We work with different stakeholders. We really work to educate the public through our events and analysis and publications. We really want to ensure that we build networks of future Atlanticist leaders. This is from our SIPA forum last year. Every year we hold, and I'll talk a little bit about the SIPA forum later, we hold an annual conference which brings all the Central and East European countries to Washington. It's really when Central Europe comes to Washington and engages with US counterparts, not only on the government level, but also in the expert and scholarly communities as well. And this is our president, actually, Peter Duran, introducing a very distinguished number of speakers, including General Ben Hodges, who just joined our team, who's the former commander of US Army Europe. And we run a lot of different publications, so we pulled kind of three examples. We've had projects on the Black Sea, projects on security more broadly, and also another information warfare report. So now I'll get back to Russian disinformation. The ultimate goal of Russian disinformation efforts within Europe and abroad is to erode Atlanticism and basically to slowly chip away at the Euro-Atlantic institutions that have anchored the post-World War II international order. At SIPA, we've been conducting research and analysis, as I mentioned, to uncover Russian narratives, tactics, and objectives. We then disseminate our findings to educate audiences in Europe and in Washington. This slide is from our website. You can access the SIPA Stratcom program, our web portal, and here is where we have, we keep all of our analysis. There's weekly, we have monitors in each of these countries monitoring the news to see what narratives are out there, what the techniques are, and then they write reports. We do compilations, and we disseminate this. We have a very extensive network of contacts in the United States and in Europe. So I wanted to go through, what we did was we pulled together some of the narratives that, there are many, many narratives. We've been pulling together some of the narratives. I wanted to show what things are trending. For example, in Poland, narrative 1, President Trump visited Poland in 2016 because it was on his way to somewhere else. The Polish government begged him to come. Really, Poland's not important to the United States. It just, you know, was a layover, basically. In narrative 2, that the CIA in Germany and Poland are responsible for orchestrating the Maidan revolution in Ukraine. Narrative 3, if Ukraine and Belarus join NATO, then Poland will be left out in the cold and will no longer be valuable to NATO. And Poland's been a very good US partner. It was a very strong partner during the Iraq War in 2003. And so Poland is a very large country in this part of Europe, and that really cuts at Poland thinking, oh, we're not that important, you know, and so people will eventually buy these narratives. In Lithuania, some of the things that we're seeing, that the US violated its agreement with Russia not to expand NATO westwards towards Russia's borders, that the EU, that the low in EU-Russia relations is all the fault of Lithuania, and that public opinion showing Lithuanians widespread support for NATO was untrustworthy because it was commissioned by the Lithuanian Ministry of Defense. So surely there's really not that much support for NATO in Lithuania. These are the narratives that we're seeing. In Latvia, we pulled 3 examples, and there are many more, we're actually right now building an interactive map where it would make it more accessible to audiences to, instead of sifting through, we have a lot of research and analysis, and that's not, in today's day and age, we're building a more interactive platform so people can see more readily what the narratives are. Narrative 1 in Latvia, that we pulled Russian language speakers. There is a Russian population in Latvia. They're discriminated against as a result of the government's attempts to promote the Latvian language. Narrative 2, the fall of the Soviet Union and the loss of the former Soviet republics was a historical tragedy. And 3, anti-Russian sanctions hurt the Latvian economy and should be lifted because Latvia can't successfully function without an economically booming Russia. So Latvia needs Russia. In Estonia, Russia had no part in the attacks, 2,000 attacks on Estonia's cyber capabilities, which they were actually to blame. The United States is trying to brainwash ethnic Russians in the Baltics, and that Estonia is a failed state. Estonia is one of the most successful states, and their defense spending was 2.07% of GDP for last year, and I think is expected at 2.2% this year. They're a great NATO ally, and they need, they want to be a part of NATO. In Romania, these anecdotes, they're memes and personal stories, all paint this appealing picture of Russia's greatness. And Facebook in Romania has become a solid breeding ground for Putin's adorers. Romania's pro-Kremlin trolls have a daily mission, essentially, to share these narratives and slowly drill them into the followers' minds. There are even some, small stories about, because Romania has been one of the most staunchly U.S., a strong U.S. supporter out of all of the countries in Central and Eastern Europe. And so to chip away at their confidence in the United States is a hard thing to do. Romanians are pretty tough overall. And so I have a Romanian colleague, and she's been studying this for the last 3 years. And it's interesting, even to some of the small stories, and it takes time to develop this, but there's been something she's been seeing on Facebook, how people who have a Russian spouse talk about how great Russia is, and Russia's such a nice place, and it's so modern and so wonderful. And so trying to counter their experiences otherwise. So also, there are stories about how there are many narratives about how the United States takes advantage of these countries, stories that are skewed to sow distrust in national governments, stories that are completely false, to sow distrust and fear about the United States, NATO, and the European Union. And there are lots and lots of narratives about how large percentages of the population were very fond living under the Soviet Union, that life was much better. I'm trying to think which way I am. So I'm going to go back, sorry. So what is Russia's objective? We've heard this today. It is chaos. That's the objective. It's to incite internal divisions within societies, to generate suspicion or distrust in democratic institutions, to undermine and weaken NATO and other Euro-Atlantic institutions. Essentially, the objective is to chip away at the West. Unlike Soviet propaganda, Russia's information warfare does not crudely promote the Kremlin's agenda. Instead, it's calibrated to confuse, befuddle, and distract. And people every day are unknowingly helping pro-Kremlin trolls feed, circulate, share, like information all the time. This kind of form of warfare, in a way, it's a force multiplier, essentially, for Russia, which in terms of economic heft and military might, as Ambassador Sedgwick said earlier, is far weaker than the countries of the European Union or NATO. And basically, Russian disinformation intensifies the geopolitical, economic, and ideological competition in the areas that are crucial, really, to U.S. interests. Our researchers, and I won't go into this in great details, but they've, and you saw on some of the slides, there are a bunch of different techniques and methods for this. And on our website, we actually have a whole section on this Stratcom portal about the techniques used. There are a lot of course, in addition, there are a lot of narratives about U.S. abandonment, especially in the Baltic states, which really are counting on the United States and NATO to protect them under Article 5 if there were an attack by Russia on those territories. Russian media in Romania like to talk a lot about the impression that the EU accession there was a failure. A lot of people thought when they joined the European Union, first wave was in 2004, the second wave in 2007, when Romania joined, that overnight the country would just become rich and modern and it would be perfect. And a lot of people were disappointed at that time. And so Russia can help, their messaging can help remind people that it's not Paris. Bucharest is not Paris, though they do call it the Paris of the East, but it's not quite the same, but not yet. US and European policymakers are just really catching up to understand and counter the threat of Russian disinformation. We've seen a lot of money now being allocated by the US Congress. There are a lot of opportunities coming forward now for grants, which SIPO is certainly applying for as soon as I get back to Washington. So we have a whole team of proposal writer, or one-person team, two-person team of proposal writers at SIPA. So what's really I guess if we don't have an adequate response to this problem, essentially the West risks public alienation, setbacks in frontline states, and potentially a fatal blow to Euro-Atlantic solidarity. And also at stake is the future of the West's ability to manage crises and to guarantee the long-term future of the European security order and America's role as a European power. So the stakes really could not be higher. So why is what happens in Latvia, Lithuania, or Estonia, why is it important to us here? Well, we've talked today that it's happening in all major Western countries. And the understanding and study of disinformation is important to Americans, not only because Moscow is aiming to erode confidence in and support for US security structures, but understanding Russian disinformation in the frontline states of Europe, our NATO allies, can also build awareness in the United States about the techniques and objectives and the sources in play. And what is really dangerous is when people don't see it as a threat to themselves, it's more likely that they'll be impacted by such propaganda. So remember, the goal is to confuse, to sow distrust, generate divisions among societies, as well as divisions between allies. There are many narratives there are always slight tensions between neighbors, of course, in the Central and East European region, and they're very good at trying to really create divisions between Poland and Ukraine. So Poland won't support Ukraine in its efforts in some efforts to join Euro-Atlantic institutions. The same between Poland and Lithuania. So it's really about generating division. What can we do? I think, sorry, my 2 slides got deleted. That's okay. So public awareness is growing. And in fact, in Europe, the most recent Eurobarometer survey showed that the majority of EU citizens view disinformation as a problem in their countries at 85%, and a danger to democracy in general, 83%. But simply stating that it's a problem isn't enough. Experts are continuing to monitor tactics and narratives and the objectives of disinformation, but they're struggling to reach and educate publics with this new information. Substantive evidence suggests that citizens don't have sufficient access to resources that help them to understand how disinformation works and how to protect themselves against it. And a more informed public can help citizens become more careful, responsible consumers in today's very chaotic information space, and inherently reduce the potential effectiveness of Russian state-sponsored disinformation and propaganda on public perceptions in the long term. But there's definitely a shortage of educational resources that provide a deeper public understanding of disinformation. So what can we do? Education and media literacy play a role. In the Baltic states, part of our work has been to run focus groups with students, journalists, anyone, any media types, to talk about the techniques and the tactics and the objectives. We work a lot with students because this is a generation that didn't live under the Soviet Union. They don't have any experience with this. So some of these messages about how NATO is bad, or the United States is trying to take advantage of us, or the European Union's taking advantage of us, those messages can resonate. So trying to explain to them the importance of Atlanticism, what Russian disinformation is, how they can recognize it. One of our focus groups at a university in Warsaw had everyone on the computer, and everyone was looking. We actually, our team at the time who was there made it an exercise to identify on their own. So they're not spreading it, spreading disinformation, and essentially working as a volunteer for the Kremlin and the Kremlin's objectives. The other thing we're doing a little bit of, and I think we need to do more of here, is to have more courses in media literacy at an earlier age. I used to teach my first graduate program, which was at George Mason University a while ago, the mid-1990s. I taught, that was one of the 100 level communications courses, and every student had to check one, but I got some students came through there. And at the time, there was no internet. I mean, email had just come online, and we had two major papers in Washington, either the Washington Post or the Washington Times. But even then, it was much simpler time to be able to show how there's bias in the media that we're reading. And then imagine today, when we're absolutely bombarded, there's so many sources to read, there's so many things. I know friends who just get their news from Facebook. I don't know how you just get your news from Facebook, but what they read, they think is real. And we need to probably start having more mandatory media literacy classes here, and even at a very early age, especially as kids do their research. Even my 8-year-old does her research online. Let's ask Google, because Google's going to know. So we have a lot of discussions about media literacy at home. So that's something that we need to do here. We need to have people really thinking critically about what it is that they're seeing, asking where did the information come from, what's the objective of it. Or there's an excellent article in the Columbia Journalism Review from last fall entitled "Making Media Literacy Great Again." And they phrased it, 3 questions people should ask: who's telling me this, how do they know it, and what's in it for them? And getting people to think in those terms about what they read can really help. So our work in the StratCom program and our Russian disinformation work, it all ties back to SIPA's mission, which, as I mentioned, is preserving and strengthening Atlanticism among present-day stakeholders and for future generations in the United States and Europe. Every year, well, these are disappeared. I wanted to just briefly kind of talk about some of the programs that we do. I briefly touched upon our SIPA forum, which is when Central Europe comes to Washington, which is about 450 people, all interested in US-European affairs. We have several fellowship programs. We have a new, it's called Title VIII, which is a State Department designation for money to study Central and Eastern Europe. And so we have 4 Americans who are in residence at SIPA part-time, working to expand their knowledge of Central and Eastern Europe. So we engage them in all of our work, hold lectures, we show them movies. We want them to know everything they can about the region to understand its history. And this is really lacking. The US government really recognized that we're lacking in this. We checked the box on Central Europe way too early. And so now we have, aside from SIPA, there's a lack of expertise. So we are trying to encourage younger generations and train them. So that's one of our programs. We also do 2 other regionally focused programs. We have our Baltic American Freedom Foundation Atlantic Strategy Fellowship, where we take Americans to the Baltic states and have them, they learn everything about whatever it is that if it could be energy. We always say at SIPA we do oils, guns, and freedom. It's kind of a joke, but it's true. We work on security, heart security, on energy security, and freedom and democracy, basically. And so we have Americans go to the region to really get an in-depth crash course, talking to a variety of experts and officials, which is really fantastic. We also bring Baltic scholars to Washington to work in our offices and learn everything about what a think tank does, and also to hone their expertise and understand US policy and strategy, which is sometimes lacking on the other side of the ocean. We also have the same type of fellowship with Hungary, where we bring a young Hungarian to SIPA. We're basically trying to build up Atlanticist leaders, people have an understanding. When you don't, you often don't, if you don't know something about something, you might think, oh, I'm not interested, that can't be good. But I think bringing people together really helps them to learn from each other, have a better understanding of where the other's coming from, and these fellowship programs do that. And we also have our Strengthening the Front Line program, which is a program that fosters greater security among NATO's eastern, really those frontline allies, by strengthening the strategic anchors of Euro-Atlantic defense. And we've done, I think, 2 of the reports were up there that we do have done. Right now, as we're a nonprofit and we run programs, you know, we write proposals, apply for grants. We have a current program running right now, project on the Teleki corridor, which is a 60-mile strip of land between Belarus and Kaliningrad, and the vulnerabilities of that strip of land. The project is studying the military and political dimensions of that corridor, of the Teleki corridor, as a means of addressing the deeper strategic problems facing the United States and NATO in 2017. And so that's a program. These are just a few of kind of our highlights. And we've also started just a few weeks ago, we launched a Russia program. And so we have Brian Whitmore, who came from Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, arrived this week actually. And he is going to be running our Russia work, and we're going to be doing a lot more video actually. And he's been doing these Power Vertical podcasts from RFERL. So this is just a brief overview of the work that we're doing. It all serves our mission, which is to promote an economically vibrant, I mentioned before, geopolitically stable and politically free Central and Eastern Europe with close and enduring ties to the United States. And how do we do this? As a nonprofit, we really connect with like-minded individuals who also believe in our mission, and to preserve and strengthen Atlanticism for the next generations. And these individuals help support our work, really to keep America more to Europe and to the West, and to maintain essentially a Western-led world order. It's Atlanticism, and we couldn't do it without them, our team. And that's everything, yes, in a nutshell. I'm happy to answer questions. I'll try. Bob.
So, couple questions. It looks like you're good job identifying narratives from Russians from disinformation campaigns. What are your rules of engagement? What catalog authors? Are you creating databases of these things to track?
Well, I mean, in the think tank world, that kind of gets a little bit beyond what, you know, our mandate, essentially. I mean, we operate under different, you know, different regulations. And so, no, we are, we've mainly been tracking the narratives and educating. We've done a lot of work on Capitol Hill. We were recently mentioned in a Senate report about Russian disinformation. We've been trying to get people to be aware that this has been going on. And, you know, these are the consequences if we don't act.
So the second part of my question is, I completely agree with you that there needs to be a response. See this sort of one-way issue, you know, Russia to the world. Do you ever run across the global center or
oh yeah,
department, or do you see them counter-messaging?
I think well, there's a whole debate about counter messaging and its effectiveness and what would need to happen. I mean, we used to do that, right? Under the Cold War, we used to have the mechanisms in place, and we don't do that anymore. And to fund those would be a major undertaking, of course. But I think that there's so much messaging going on. How do you counter message in today's environment? I mean, we have to. I think I'm a very strong advocate for people-to-people contact. I really love these exchange programs. I think we need more of them. We've cut things back. We really checked the box on this region, and we need to invest more. So it could be investing in counter messaging, but what would that look like, and what would the cost be? And would the U.S. taxpayer agree to it? You know, think that this is a great idea? I'm not sure. No. So I think I know it's really being debated. What should we be? How do we counter? Should we be countering that way? Should we be on the ground? We try to do a lot of work on the ground, and a lot of USG arms that are funding disinformation work support that. But then how do you reach? You can reach the university students. How do you reach the farmers? We joke around that we're going to create the truck and we're going to have the megaphones on the top with the banners, and we're going to drive around Central and Eastern Europe. It'll take us a long time, but how do you get that message out?
Countermeasure, you're talking about the defensive operations, right? Trying to tell the truth. You're not talking about offensive disinformation, are you? Warfare. Well, you talk about disinformation warfare, but it seems like we're talking about one side of it, that is trying to counter what other guys doing.
Right. I think there's so much. There's so many narratives out there. It's such in real fast speed. There's no way we could counter every single message, but if we understand the themes, and I think we have more presence in the region, maybe more high state level visits, more conveying that counters that. So when there's a strong message that NATO doesn't, or America doesn't care about you, or that we show some type of engagement, that because we didn't, a lot of these countries worried under the previous administration. We had our big pivot to Asia, and the Central and East Europeans were like, wait a minute, what about Europe? In fact, a lot of the Europeans were like, what about Europe? And I think there was a feeling of neglect, whether that's accurate or not. It's a perception that many countries had, but increasing engagement. And I think the U.S. government has people really positioned right now to do that. But I think engagement is a good way to counter. There's a question over here.
I don't know if I misunderstood the question or not. I was thinking maybe he was asking, are you coming against? Are you finding people propaganda against what you're doing? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I was just saying that because we have a global engagement center that's its job is supposed to be to promote America across the world. I was just curious if they were running across engagement center in any venue that is trying to counter what they're seeing from the Russians. If our message was actually getting out, we were actually trying.
Well, Global Engagement Center just released a few weeks ago their calls for proposals. So they've been sitting on a lot of money appropriated by Congress. And so now they've actually been talking to the think tank community, talking to embassies in the region. And so there are calls out for proposals that are coming up. But it'll see how long it takes them to go through so many proposals. But it's they're looking at what can be done and what the ideas are. And there are groups out there who are probably the most famous in Ukraine, which is in Ukraine, is an organization called stopfake.org. And they have been studying this, and they cross-post a lot of our work as well, because there's so much Russian disinformation in Ukraine. Yes.
In your presentation, you shared with us propaganda and disinformation narrative.
Mm-hmm.
And then you listed the techniques. Like card stacking was the technique everyone saw. Another one, gaslighting.
Yeah. Well, luckily I downloaded this from our website, so I am not part of the team that put these techniques together. These are the analysts who are working on this each week. So card stacking, they defined as facts or statements. Facts or statements are partially true. This occurs when information is correct, but it's offered selectively or key facts are omitted. The Kremlin typically uses this technique to guide audiences to a conclusion that fits into a prefabricated or false narrative. And gaslighting, there are a lot of techniques here. I'm sorry. Well, oh, yes.
Gaslighting is basically a technique where what you tell the people is bad about your decisions.
Perfect. Thank you. Excellent. Yes.
Do you have any research that indicates how folks consume information, perhaps different, especially the young, have access to multiple websites?
Well, it's a very mobile, I feel like it's a very mobile culture. We don't have any data on this specifically, but just from working on this region for a long time, people have they have mobile phones. They're well, in fact, because you often couldn't have a telephone under the previous regime, but people do have access. There are a lot of people. I have a lot of friends in Hungary, for example, who are on Facebook. They're all part of the social. Not all part of, that's a generalization, but people do get their access. They do get their media. Online. There's just a variety of sources. It's just kind of overwhelming, like I feel like it is here. Yes.
Just to follow up on question, you brought up energy savings for students.
Mm-hmm.
There are students, local students, these countries, who communicates with them from your nonprofit? Are they other students? Are they adults?
Well, that's a good point. So we have quite a few. Well, we have people. We have analysts in each country, and then we have in Poland where we've done. We've done this in the Baltic states and Poland, but in Poland specifically, where we've gone and we're just approved to do some more of these. We have a Polish office, and we have a young guy there, which really helps. He's just out of university and very well connected, so he goes. But also we bring a more senior person. She's one of our analysts. She's probably 28, 29, but she's very experienced working on this. So she's a bit more, because you have to speak to them. We kind of thought, well, you don't want to bring the heads of this program are very are incredible experts on the subject, but in a way we wanted to reach them more personally. So it's a good point. So we thought about that in Poland.
Social media. Students. Where we are. Students.
Mm-hmm.
Students. Is there ever a capability or initiative? Students talk.
Well, I'm sure there probably are. Our organization hasn't done anything like that. We at one point, what we really wanted to do, we just didn't have funding for it. When we do our annual forum, we really wanted to have, because we have people who've worked in U.S. government who have known, they were there, like Ambassador Daniel Freed. They were there during the transition. They've got this rich knowledge of history, and we wanted to have feeds from the universities in the region, at least from Hungary, Slovakia, the Czech Republic, and Poland, so they could see the conference and connect. And I think trying to find ways to do that, we do, thanks to our Warsaw office, when we do our forum, one person stays behind in Warsaw, and she actually puts up the video screen, and she does the live stream, at least for the first part of the conference, so they feel connected. But we wanted to do it so people could send in questions and feel like they're part of the community, which they are, but you need to be connected somehow to do that. Last question.
It's a question and a comment, really. I want to believe, and I have to believe, that our government is answering this. That is part of how we won the Cold War. So better be doing something. And the other has to do with young people. This is how they get their information.
Mhm.
And I'm old enough to remember and know that Russia is a concern, it always has been.
Mhm.
And why we ever let that slip away, I don't understand. But at some point in time, a generation has come up that doesn't understand that.
Yep.
And I see these same techniques being used within our organization today.
Mhm.
So we better get people that are interested in our countering. That, I guess, is my. Thank you.
I agree with you 100%.
Great information. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks.